Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. The fast-paced war in the Middle East now brings us new angles and developments almost every hour of the day. Monday has brought soaring oil prices and energy uncertainty and questions about who Mojtaba Khamenei is and what he means for Iran and the escalating crisis that is beginning to impact the world. To look at the situation as it stands right now, I'm joined by Michael MacKay, former lecturer at the University of Kyiv, Mohyla Academy. Hello and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, news has emerged from Kremlin sources that Donald Trump spoke to Vladimir Putin today regarding potential solutions to the Middle East conflict. Allegedly, this was a constructive conversation. What do you think of this? What might this signal?
I think it signals that Trump has a continuing subservience to Putin, that he looks to him as a mentor. And paradoxically, he's trying to move past and, in fact, ignore the revelation that Russia has been helping Iran with targeting intelligence for Shahed drones. At the same time, he's accepted President Zelensky and Ukraine's help with drone interceptors. So I think this phone call sends confusing signals, but to me, it's a confirmation of the dependent relationship that Trump has to Putin.
Trump also says that ending the war alongside Israel will be a joint decision. But what does this depend on? Because at the end of the day, the question is, what is the plan? We now know that there are new nuclear weapons in Iran. So what is Israel getting at?
Well, I don't know that there is a plan because there's been constantly shifting statements about this on the subject of nuclear weapons. For example, half a year ago, Trump said that the nuclear weapons program had been completely destroyed and would not get off the ground for decades. And yet now it's an imminent threat. So I don't think we can talk about an end state for the war when there were never any clear objectives stated for it beginning in the first place. This was a war of choice by Netanyahu, who persuaded Trump to go along. In a way, the Israelis have been pushing the aggression farther than the Americans ever suspected, for example, with strikes on oil facilities, domestic oil production facilities in Iran. So I think that the talk of an end state is really an expression of the confusion that there is no end state envisioned for this war. So
there's the issue of oil. There's the issue of the constant tension in the Middle East. There's the issue of no plan. So what is Israel doing right now in the Middle East, more broadly speaking? Because it's not just about Iran.
No. For example, we see that Israel has launched a ground offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. We see that Israel has, in a way, nudged the Gulf states towards a closer alignment with the USA, which, of course, kind of reduces their opposition to Israel's power in the region. And also, it turns attention away from Israel's actions in Gaza. So I think Israel, or more precisely the Netanyahu government, is getting a lot out of this. In particular, that they are now known to be the drivers of U.S. policy in that region, even more than Russia is a driver of U.S. policy worldwide.
So we are speaking about Israel right now. Obviously, the U.S. is supporting Israel in this operation. But what is the U.S., what is the U.S.'s agenda in the Middle East, aside from supporting Israel?
I don't think we can speak of a U.S. agenda because the United States does not have a national policy as we have seen in previous eras. We have to speak about the Trump agenda. And it's a personal one, and it is a chaotic one, like the mind of Trump. So it's Trump's agenda to appear to be a strong leader, to appear to be decisive, and what we see is other Trump administration officials scrambling after originally opposing these strikes on Iran to fall into line behind it. And to, for example, sidelining Congress so war measures aren't passed, and essentially trying to get a rally around the flag effect after the fact, even though Trump made no effort to build a coalition ahead of time, no planning, such as building up strategic reserves of oil in the United States. So I don't think we can speak of what a U.S. policy is, because the United States, as a country, is only harmed by this. And we get a better understanding of what's going on by seeing into the decaying mind of Trump about what he thinks he's getting out of it.
But we also now see that Ukraine is getting involved despite being at war itself. Ukraine is now providing its expertise thus far to Jordan. But also, it is also supporting the US and Israel in the Middle East conflict. So in return, it also expects Patriot missiles. So how effective is this move for Ukraine? And also, what does it mean for the Middle East conflict as we see it now?
I don't see Ukraine as supporting the U.S. and Israel in their war in the Middle East. I don't think that's a correct way to put it. As you point out, Ukraine is now supplying drone interceptors and experts to Jordan, and that's what Ukraine is doing. And to me, this is diplomatically brilliant. What the Ukrainians have done is saying, okay, this is not a war of our choosing, but our expertise can help the Gulf states, can help U.S. military installations, and possibly even help Israel with defense against these Shahed drones, which Ukraine originally produced and still manufactures. And they're very inexpensive, and they continue to target civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, embassies, and so on in the Gulf states particularly. So what Ukraine is doing is leveraging what is really, to the Russians, distraction from their war against Ukraine and turning it into a diplomatic victory for Ukraine, because Ukraine does have these drone interceptors which can be produced at a 1/1000th the cost of a Patriot missile, air defense missile. And I think that Ukraine is getting a lot of credit for this. Maybe not so much in the Trump admin, but in particularly in the Gulf states, because they're starting to see what's going on, and hopefully they'll reconsider their tacit support for Russian aggression, voting against Ukraine in the UN, not supporting sanctions against the Putin regime. Hopefully the Gulf states in particular will rethink their position and have a better understanding of who their friends really are.
Another development is that French President Emmanuel Macron has informed of the deployment of the country's naval forces to the Middle East and Cyprus in response to the Iran war. He's described it as an unprecedented move. How would you describe this? How would you interpret this announcement? At the end of the day, it comes across as official European involvement. Would you view this as an escalation of sorts, given that this is European involvement?
I don't see it as an escalation. I see it as President Macron doing what is necessary. Don't forget, France was not consulted on this. Great Britain was not consulted. European Union was not consulted. No U.S. allies were consulted. And then these countries were browbeaten into providing access to military installations, for example, for the staging of the American strikes. Spain, in particular, suffered from this. So having not been consulted and while still not wanting to engage in the strikes that Israel and the United States are carrying out, I think President Macron is doing the right thing. He looks at the closure of the Straits of Hormuz as being a threat to France's strategic interests, the supply of oil. And frankly, he doesn't trust that the Americans have a plan for opening it up, since they didn't see that the natural consequence of their strikes would be that it would be closed, that oil prices would shoot up, and supply would be threatened to a number of European countries. For example, there's a critical shortage of natural gas in Great Britain right now because of a lack of stockpiling. Again, Britain was given no warning whatsoever. So I don't think that what President Macron is doing is escalation. I think it's actually de-escalation and protecting France's national interests.
Now, as we wrap up slowly, I wanted to ask about Albania. Albania's Edi Rama has condemned Iran's ballistic missile attack on Turkey. But there is a question about whether there is a risk of an attack on the base of the Mona Fekin, that is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. They have a base in Albania. Do you think that that base is at any risk? And if Albania, given that the base is located there, were to be attacked, what significance does that have, given that that would make, it would bring the conflict closer to Europe?
Oh, it would be a disaster if that were to happen, because Albania is a member of NATO. Albania participates, for example, in the forward presence of NATO, and I believe they're in Latvia. So I think that this would be a disaster. I think what the Albanians are doing is issuing a cautionary note to point out that such a thing would be reckless on the part of any party. But this is really the failure of the U.S. to get out of the escalation trap, which they walked right into when they started this war. So I think it's worrying, but I hope that people will pay attention and start to realize the danger. We see many countries heightening their state of military awareness because we just don't know what happened. We can predict that long-term terrorist attacks coming from disaffected groups in Iran and elsewhere will increase. Because there has been no effort by the Americans, and certainly not the Israelis, to run a hearts and minds war. For example, to get behind the democratic uprising of the Iranian people against the Islamic Republic. So I think it's very worrying, but hopefully a good cautionary move.
Okay. Michael MacKay, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for World Talks. Thanks so much for joining us, and stay tuned for much more news and analysis on TVP World. Goodbye.